When did you accidentally put someone's nuts in your mouth? I was at my friend's 10th birthday party when I grabbed what I thought was a vanilla cupcake. One bite, and I knew something was wrong. The taste. Peanut butter. I need an EpiPen, I gasped, already feeling my throat tighten. I just ate peanuts. My Aunt Sharon looked up from where she was helping Sophie open presents. She had that look she always got when Mom wasn't around, like she'd been waiting for something. Oh, honey, you're fine. Stop being dramatic. No, I'm allergic. My tongue felt weird already, thick like when you lick a battery. You just think you're allergic because your mother babies you. She walked over, still holding Sophie's new Barbie. Behind her, Grandma nodded from the couch. That's what I keep telling her mother, Grandma said, not even looking up from her phone. In my day, we didn't have all these allergies. We just ate food. The thing was, Aunt Sharon was a nurse. A real pediatric nurse who worked at Children's Hospital. That's why Mom trusted her to watch me. I kept touching my throat, and I could feel something happening under my skin, like tiny bugs crawling. Aunt Sharon, please. You know what? She walked over to my backpack hanging by the door. This is exactly the problem. She pulled out my EpiPen, the one Mom made me carry everywhere. This thing. This is why you think you're dying every time you eat something new. She walked to the kitchen and turned on the garbage disposal. Crunch. The EpiPen was destroyed. There. Now you can't use it as a crutch. She wiped her hands on her jeans like she'd just done something good. You asked to try the cupcakes, sweetie. I told you they were peanut butter cup surprise inside, remember? But she hadn't. She'd said they were vanilla with chocolate. My arms started itching, that deep itch you can't reach. And when I looked down, red bumps were spreading across my skin like spilled paint. Look. I held out my arms to her. Look at this. Anxiety hives. She used her nurse voice, the one that made other adults listen to her. I see them at the hospital all the time. Kids think they're sick, so their body makes them sick. The other kids at the party had stopped playing. They were staring at me. I started scratching without meaning to, my nails digging into the welts. It felt like my skin was on fire from the inside. Ew! Sophie's friend Megan backed away. What's wrong with her face? I touched my cheek. It felt puffy, like when I cried too hard, but worse. She's being dramatic because it's not her party, Aunt Sharon said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Come on, apologize to Sophie for scaring her guests. I can't. The scratching got worse. I looked down and saw blood under my fingernails. Sophie started crying. Not the fake crying she did to get her way, but real, scared crying. Mom, something's wrong with her. Aunt Sharon sighed like I was ruining everything on purpose. Say sorry to Sophie. I'm sorry, I wheezed. The welts had connected into huge red patches. My lips felt like someone had stung them with bees. I need help. The only thing you need is to stop scratching for attention. She grabbed my wrists, her nurse hand strong. You're making it worse on purpose. That's when Sophie completely lost it. She threw her new Barbie at her mom and screamed. Aunt Sharon let go of me to grab Sophie, and I knew this was my only chance. I crawled toward Aunt Sharon's purse on the counter. My fingers felt like balloon animals, all puffy and wrong, but I found her phone and dialed 911. What are you? Aunt Sharon spun around, Sophie still shrieking in her arms. 911, what's your emergency? Help! I screamed before she could grab it. I'm having an allergic reaction and... Aunt Sharon ripped the phone away, but I could hear the tiny voice still talking. She hung up. They're already coming, I wheezed. My whole body was covered in the rash now, even my scalp burning. They heard Sophie screaming. Aunt Sharon's face went white, then red. I'm a nurse. I would know if you were really... The doorbell rang, then pounding. Paramedics! Open up! Grandma finally looked up from her phone. Sharon, what did you do? The rest happened so fast. The paramedics pushed past Aunt Sharon when she tried to explain I was fine. One of them took one look at me and stuck a needle in my thigh. The medicine felt cold going in, but my throat started opening up almost immediately. Anaphylactic shock, the paramedic said to his partner. Where's her EpiPen? In the garbage disposal, Sophie said, still hiccuping from crying. My mom put it there. I'll never forget the look the paramedics gave Aunt Sharon. She kept saying, I'm a nurse, over and over while they loaded me onto the stretcher. But the paramedic just said, then you should have known better. The lack of oxygen left me with some processing delays, not major, but permanent. When Mom arrived at the ICU, she didn't cry. She just asked the doctor for Aunt Sharon's work schedule and said, she's a nurse. She'll understand what happens next. Everything after that gets blurry, but I remember waking up in a bed that wasn't mine with machines beeping around me and this weird fog in my head that made thinking feel like walking through mud. Mom sat in a chair next to the bed holding my hand so tight it hurt a little, but I didn't want her to let go because everything felt wrong and slow. The ceiling had these white tiles with tiny holes in them, and I counted them over and over because numbers were the only thing that made sense, even though I kept losing count and starting over. Mom's face looked different from normal with dark circles under her eyes, and this scary calm expression like when she found out Dad cheated, but way worse. She squeezed my hand harder when she saw my eyes were open, and told me the doctor said my brain didn't get enough oxygen during the allergic reaction. So now I have something called processing delays, which means my thinking would be slower sometimes. She promised me Aunt Sharon would face consequences for what she did, and her voice got this hard edge that made my chest feel tight. A lady named Bethany Townsend came into the room wearing a badge that said Hospital Social Services, and she had this folder full of papers that she kept flipping through while she talked. She explained they had to report what happened to the authorities because a medical professional deliberately destroyed life-saving medication, and Aunt Sharon had been removed from my visitor list, which made me feel both safe and sad at the same time. The nurse checking my IV bag kept looking at me with this sorry expression, and finally said she heard about what happened and couldn't believe a colleague would do something like that to a kid with allergies. I kept hearing that crunch sound from the garbage disposal eating my EpiPen, and wondering if maybe I really was being dramatic like Aunt Sharon always said. But then I'd touch the tape holding my IV in place and remember the paramedics sticking that needle in my leg. The paramedics who saved me had to file official statements about finding me in anaphylactic shock without any epinephrine available. And that's when CPS got involved, because a caregiver had deliberately put a child with known medical needs in danger. Before they let me leave the hospital, a nurse taught Mom and me how to use the new EpiPens they gave us. And we practiced over and over with the trainer pen that didn't have a real needle until I could do it perfect, even when my brain felt slow. They made us this whole allergy action plan with steps written out and pictures showing exactly what to do, and the nurse made me repeat it back 3 times to make sure I understood everything. Mom drove us home super slow and careful like I might break, and as soon as we got inside, she went straight to her phone and blocked Aunt Sharon and Grandma from being able to call or visit us. Grandma kept sending these angry texts that made Mom's phone buzz over and over saying we were overreacting and that I was fine now, so why were we making such a big fuss about nothing? That first night home, I woke up gasping and grabbing at my throat because it felt like it was closing again, even though Mom said it was just a bad dream, but my body didn't know the difference. Mom held me while I shook and helped me use my inhaler the right way and kept telling me we were safe now, and Aunt Sharon couldn't hurt me anymore, but I still couldn't stop shaking. The next week, Mom took me to see a neurologist who had me do all these tests like remembering words and copying shapes and following directions while he wrote notes on his clipboard. He scheduled more cognitive testing to figure out exactly how the lack of oxygen affected my brain, and Mom took notes on everything he said in this little notebook she carried everywhere now. I kept playing with my new medical alert bracelet that said, "Severe peanut allergy" in big letters, and had a special code the hospital could scan to see all my medical information. While we were waiting for test results, Mom's phone made the notification sound for a voice message, and when she played it, I heard Sophie's voice all crying and broken, saying she was sorry her mom hurt me. Sophie kept saying it wasn't supposed to happen like that, and she tried to tell her mom I needed help, but nobody listened to her, and now she felt like it was her fault too. Hearing Sophie's voice made my chest feel tight and weird, because it wasn't her fault, but also she was there, and she was Aunt Sharon's daughter, and everything felt confused and mixed up in my head. Mom asked if I wanted to send Sophie a message back, but I didn't know what to say because how do you talk to your cousin when her mom almost killed you, and now everyone's fighting? The hospital bills started coming in the mail, and Mom would open them at the kitchen table with this look on her face that meant expensive, but she said insurance would cover most of it, and the rest wasn't my problem to worry about. 2 days later, Mom's phone started buzzing like crazy during dinner, and when she looked at it, her face got this tight look that meant something bad was happening. She showed me the screen, and there was our family group chat with like 50 new messages from Aunt Sharon saying I'd just had a panic attack at Sophie's party, not a real allergic reaction, and that Mom was blowing everything out of proportion to turn the family against her. The messages kept coming, one after another, with Aunt Sharon posting these medical articles about anxiety in children, and how kids can make themselves sick from stress, and how Mom was probably causing my fake allergies by being overprotective. Mom's fingers moved fast on her phone screen, taking screenshots of everything while more relatives started responding, some asking what happened and others already taking sides. Uncle Mike wrote that he always thought my allergies seemed suspicious, and Cousin Janet said maybe Aunt Sharon had a point about Mom being too dramatic. But then Aunt Lisa posted that she saw the ambulance at Sophie's house and whatever happened looked pretty serious. Mom kept screenshotting everything without responding, her jaw getting tighter with each new message, and then she blocked the whole group chat and made a phone call to someone named Jackson Beckham, who she said was a lawyer her coworker recommended. 3 days later, we sat in Jackson's office downtown, this big room with dark wood furniture and diplomas on the walls, while Mom spread out all the hospital paperwork and the screenshots and the discharge papers that said anaphylactic shock in big letters. Jackson looked through everything slowly, writing notes on a yellow pad, asking Mom questions about what the paramedics said, and did we have their names and could we get their reports. He held up the paper that showed my blood test results from the hospital with the super high histamine levels and tapped it with his pen, saying this was exactly the kind of evidence that proved it was a real allergic reaction, not anxiety. Mom pulled out more papers, including my allergy test results from when I was 5, and all my medical records showing every reaction I'd ever had, and Jackson nodded while organizing them into different piles on his desk. When Mom told him about the destroyed EpiPen, he stopped writing and looked up with this serious expression, asking if anyone else saw it happen, and Mom said Sophie told the paramedics about it. The whole meeting took 2 hours, and by the end, Jackson had 3 legal pads full of notes, and said we had a really strong case for medical negligence, especially since Aunt Sharon was a pediatric nurse who should have known better. A week passed before we had to go to my school for a meeting about accommodations, and the school nurse sat across from us with her arms crossed, looking at Mom like she didn't quite believe what she was hearing. Mom explained everything that happened at the party and showed the hospital discharge papers, but the nurse kept asking questions like, was I sure I actually ate peanuts? And maybe it was something else that caused the reaction. She wanted to see proof that I needed extra time on tests now because of the processing delays, so Mom had to pull out the neurologist's report that explained how lack of oxygen affected my brain. The nurse read through it slowly, frowning at parts, then said she'd need to verify everything with my doctors before approving any accommodations, which made Mom's face get red, but she stayed calm and said that was fine. After another week of Mom making phone calls and sending documents, the school finally scheduled my first day back, and walking through the front doors felt like everyone was staring at me, even though they probably weren't. In the hallway, kids whispered when I walked by, and I heard someone say something about Sophie's party, and another kid asked if it was true that I almost died. During lunch, I couldn't make myself go into the cafeteria with all that food everywhere, and kids eating things that might have peanuts, so I went to the nurse's office instead, and ate my sandwich there while she did paperwork, and pretended not to watch me. The nurse had this little fridge where I could keep my lunch safe from other foods, and she showed me where she kept my new EpiPens in a special locked cabinet with my picture on it. 2 days after that, I met Theodore Mullins, the school counselor, in his office that had beanbag chairs and a poster about feelings on the wall. He explained that a 504 plan meant the school would help me learn better with my processing delays, like giving me extra time to finish tests and assignments. Theodore had me do some activities like copying shapes and remembering word lists to see what was hard for me now, and when I got frustrated because I kept forgetting things, he said my brain just needed different kinds of help now, and that didn't make me broken or stupid. He wrote down notes about how I needed breaks during long assignments, and how sometimes I knew the answer, but needed extra time to get the words out, and he smiled and said lots of kids had 504 plans and did great in the school. The next Monday, Mom drove me to see Camilla Rice in an office building that had a playground visible from the window, and Camilla had me sit wherever felt comfortable, while she explained that she helped kids who went through scary medical things. She asked me to tell her what happened at the party, and when I started crying talking about Aunt Sharon throwing away my EpiPen, she handed me tissues and said what Aunt Sharon did was called medical abuse. Camilla explained that when someone who's supposed to take care of you hurts you instead, especially someone who's a nurse and knows better, that's abuse even if they're family, and even if they say they were trying to help. She taught me this breathing thing where you pretend to smell flowers and blow out candles, and we practiced it until I could do it without thinking too hard. Meanwhile, Jackson was busy filing paperwork at the courthouse, and he called Mom to explain he was requesting something called preservation of evidence, which meant the hospital and emergency services couldn't delete or lose anything about my case. He especially wanted the 911 call recording, because he said hearing my voice during the actual emergency would show the judge how serious it really was, and that I wasn't faking or being dramatic. Mom had to sign a bunch of forms giving Jackson permission to get my medical records and talk to my doctors, and he said the legal process would take time, but he was confident we had a strong case. 2 weeks later, Mom's phone rang during dinner, and when she answered, it was someone from the hospital's risk management department with this careful, smooth voice, trying to explain that they were very sorry about my experience, but the hospital couldn't be responsible for what employees did outside of work. Mom put the phone on speaker so Jackson could listen from his office, and I could hear his pen scratching on paper as the risk manager kept talking about how Aunt Sharon was off duty, and the hospital had no liability. The risk manager offered to have their patient advocate reach out to discuss my care going forward, but Jackson had told Mom not to agree to anything, so she just said she'd need to review everything with her attorney first. After that call, things moved faster when Nina Gorman from the nursing board contacted Mom to say they were opening an official investigation into Aunt Sharon's professional conduct. Nina came to our house with a recorder and a thick folder of forms, asking me to tell her exactly what happened while she typed notes on her laptop. When I got to the part about the EpiPen in the garbage disposal, she stopped typing and asked me to repeat that part, then asked Mom if anyone else witnessed it. Mom explained that Sophie had told the paramedics about it, and Nina wrote that down and underlined it twice on her notepad. She asked really specific questions about what Aunt Sharon said and did, like did she check my pulse or look at my skin before saying I was fine, and whether she tried to stop the paramedics from treating me. The interview took 3 hours, and by the end, Nina had pages of notes and said destroying emergency medication was an extremely serious violation that the board would investigate thoroughly. Just when things felt like they were finally moving forward, I was in my room doing homework when I heard car doors slam, and Grandma's voice outside yelling for Mom to open the door. She kept pounding on the door saying this was ridiculous and we needed to stop this silly family fight right now and talk like adults. Mom stood at the door without opening it, talking through the glass in this calm voice I'd never heard her use before, saying anyone who denied my medical condition and supported what Sharon did wasn't safe for me to be around. Grandma yelled that she was my grandmother and had rights to see me, but Mom just said those rights ended when she chose to endanger my life, and if she didn't leave, Mom would call the police. I watched from my window as Grandma stood on our porch for another 10 minutes, yelling about how we were destroying the family, and she'd make us regret this, before finally getting in her car and driving away. 3 days later, Mom's phone buzzed while she was making breakfast, and when she looked at it, her face went completely still. She handed me the phone, and there was an email from a law firm saying that Aunt Sharon was requesting that Mom cease allowing any contact between me and Sophie. The letter had all this legal language about harassment and emotional distress to a minor child, saying I was disturbing Sophie's recovery from witnessing my medical emergency. Mom forwarded it to Jackson right away, and within an hour he called back saying it was just intimidation, that Aunt Sharon was trying to control the narrative and isolate Sophie from telling anyone else what she saw. He told Mom to save everything and not to respond directly, that he'd handle all communication through proper channels. The next week was my cognitive testing appointment at the Children's Development Center downtown. They started at 8 in the morning with all these different tests, having me repeat number sequences and remember word lists and solve puzzles that got harder and harder. By noon I was already tired, but they kept going, making me read passages and answer questions about them, except the words kept getting mixed up in my head. The doctor had me do math problems that I knew I should understand, but by 2 o'clock I was making mistakes on simple addition, forgetting to carry numbers or losing track of which problem I was doing. She made notes every time I rubbed my eyes or asked her to repeat instructions, and when we finally finished at 4, she told Mom that the fatigue was making my processing delays much more obvious, that my brain had to work harder than normal kids to do the same tasks, so I got tired faster. 2 days later in math class, Mrs. Peterson was explaining fractions on the board when I felt that familiar crawling sensation on my arms. I looked down and saw red bumps spreading across my skin, even though I hadn't eaten anything. Just the stress of trying to keep up with the lesson was making my body react. But this time I knew what to do, pulling out the action plan card from my backpack and showing it to Mrs. Peterson, who immediately got the Benadryl from my emergency kit in her desk drawer. She had me sit in the quiet corner while she called the nurse, talking to me in this calm voice about how I was doing exactly the right thing, that my body was just stressed and we'd get through it together. The Benadryl made me sleepy, but the hives started fading after 20 minutes, and I didn't need the EpiPen, which felt like winning, even though some kids stared at me funny when I came back to my seat. That Friday, Jackson came to our house with his laptop and a small speaker, saying he'd finally gotten the 911 recording through Discovery. He warned us it would be hard to hear, but we needed to listen to it together for the case. When he pressed play, I heard my own voice screaming for help, begging for someone to come, saying I couldn't breathe. While in the background, Aunt Sharon kept insisting I was fine, that I was being dramatic, that she was a nurse and would know if something was really wrong. Sophie's crying got louder and louder until you could hear the operator asking for the address again, then Aunt Sharon grabbing the phone and the line going dead. Mom's hands were shaking and tears were running down her face, but not sad tears, the angry kind that made her jaw tight. Jackson said this recording was exactly what they needed to show the severity of the situation, that anyone listening could hear I was in genuine distress while a medical professional ignored it. The following Monday was my first real session with Camilla after the evaluation, and she had me practice something called grounding exercises for when I got scared about food. She taught me to name 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, and 1 I could taste, doing it over and over until it became automatic. Then she said we were going to the hospital cafeteria for just 5 minutes, not to eat anything but just to be around food and practice staying calm. Walking into that cafeteria made my chest tight immediately, all those smells mixing together, not knowing what had peanuts and what didn't. But Camilla stayed right next to me while I did the grounding exercise, naming the blue chairs, the white tables, the buzzing lights, the cold metal tray rail under my fingers. We stayed exactly 5 minutes, then left, and even though I was sweating and my hands were shaking, I'd done it without running away, which Camilla said was huge progress. 2 days later was the 5:04 meeting at the school with Mom, Mr. Mullins, the principal, and 3 teachers sitting around the conference table. Mr. Mullins had a whole folder of documentation, including the letter from the paramedics describing my condition when they arrived at Sophie's party, how I was in severe anaphylactic shock with my airway closing and hives covering my entire body. The principal's face changed when she read that part, especially the line about how the destruction of my prescribed epinephrine could have been fatal. They approved extra time for all my tests and assignments, letting me take breaks when I got tired, and Mr. Mullins smiled at me when it was over, saying I was brave for advocating for myself, and that the school would make sure I had what I needed to succeed. The next morning, Nina Gorman called Mom saying she needed to interview the paramedics who responded to the 911 call as part of her investigation. Mom put it on speaker, while Nina explained that both paramedics had provided sworn statements confirming they found me in severe anaphylactic shock, requiring immediate intervention. They stated that if epinephrine had been administered when symptoms first appeared, the oxygen deprivation that caused my processing delays could have been completely prevented. Nina said this was crucial evidence for the nursing board review, showing that Aunt Sharon's actions directly resulted in permanent harm. A week later, Jackson got a call from the hospital's legal department saying their internal investigation had uncovered something significant. They'd found documentation in their computer system showing that Aunt Sharon had accessed my medical records 2 months before the party, records that clearly listed my peanut allergy with the severity marked as life-threatening. The hospital's lawyers suddenly wanted to discuss settlement options, realizing that one of their nurses had prior knowledge of a severe allergy and still destroyed emergency medication. But then things got worse when Nina called to warn us that Aunt Sharon had filed a counter-complaint with the nursing board. She was claiming that Mom had Munchausen by proxy, that she was making me sick for attention, and had coached me to fake allergic reactions. Mom's whole body went rigid when she heard this, but she stayed calm on the phone, telling Nina she had years of allergy testing from 3 different doctors, emergency room records from When I was 4 and 6 and genetic testing showing I inherited the tendency for severe allergies from my dad's side of the family. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out the filing cabinet, gathering every single medical document while Nina said not to worry, that the evidence was overwhelming in our favor. The last piece came when Jackson found someone willing to break ranks at the hospital. One of Aunt Sharon's colleagues agreed to testify anonymously that Sharon regularly dismissed patient allergies as modern nonsense, that she'd complained multiple times about parents inventing food allergies for attention. The colleague had documented 3 separate incidents where Sharon had argued with parents about allergy protocols, saying kids needed to toughen up instead of being coddled. This pattern of behavior was exactly what Jackson needed to show. This wasn't just one mistake, but a dangerous attitude that finally went too far with someone she thought she could control, because we were family. 2 days later, a CPS caseworker came to our house with a big canvas bag full of art supplies and sat on our living room floor with me while Mom watched from the kitchen doorway. She spread out paper and crayons and markers and told me we could just draw while we talked, if that felt easier than looking at each other. I picked up a red crayon and started coloring in circles while she asked me questions about what happened at the party. But when I tried to explain about the cupcake, my words got stuck and came out in the wrong order. She waited without rushing me and said we had all the time we needed. I drew the garbage disposal with brown scribbles for the destroyed EpiPen while telling her how the crunching sound still played in my head sometimes. She took pictures of my drawings and wrote notes in neat handwriting, nodding when I had to stop and start over because my brain wouldn't put the sentences together right. When we finished, she put everything in clear folders and told Mom that my testimony was very clear even with the processing delays. The next morning, I woke up to Mom standing on our porch with a recycling bin, tossing in a whole stack of papers that Grandma had left by our door during the night. I could see the headlines on some of them about food allergies being fake and kids being too sensitive these days. Mom didn't even bring them inside, just dumped them straight into the blue bin and said we were done letting people debate whether my medical condition was real. Later that week, Camilla spread a big piece of paper across her office table and helped me write down everything I wanted the nursing board to know about what Aunt Sharon did to me. We worked on it for 3 sessions because I kept getting frustrated when I couldn't find the right words or when they came out jumbled. She taught me to take breaks and breathe when my brain felt foggy, and we'd come back to it when I was ready. By the 3rd session, we had 2 pages of my own words explaining how scared I was, how much it hurt that someone who was supposed to protect me chose not to believe me, and how the processing delays made school harder now. Camilla typed it up exactly how I said it without fixing my simple words or making it sound fancy. Then Nina called to tell us the nursing board had scheduled their preliminary hearing for next month, and I'd need to testify about what happened. My stomach felt sick immediately and I started scratching at my arms even though there weren't any hives this time. Camilla sat with me on her couch and reminded me that telling the truth about what happened wasn't being mean to family because family shouldn't hurt you on purpose. She said Aunt Sharon made choices that hurt me, and now she had to face what happens when nurses don't protect kids. That night, Sophie called from her friend Ika's phone while I was doing homework, and her voice sounded small and scared. She told me her mom never said anything about peanut butter being in those cupcakes, that she'd actually said they were vanilla with chocolate chips. Sophie said she'd been too scared to tell anyone because she didn't want to get her mom in trouble, but she knew it was important for people to know the truth. I felt sad for both of us, stuck in the middle of something that shouldn't have happened. Mom recorded the call on her laptop while Sophie talked. The next week, Theodore came to get me from math class, and we went to his office to practice what I'd say at the hearing. He showed me how to hold up my hand when I needed a break to find my words, and taught me to say, "I need a moment," if my brain got stuck. We practiced with him pretending to be the board members asking questions, and he reminded me they'd understand about my processing delays because they had my medical records. He made me practice over and over until I felt less scared about forgetting everything when it mattered. Then came the day of my neurology appointment, and as Mom and I walked through the hospital parking lot afterward, Aunt Sharon appeared from behind a van. She started walking toward us fast, saying Mom's name loud and angry, but Mom pulled out her phone immediately and started recording while grabbing my hand to keep walking toward our car. Aunt Sharon followed us shouting about how we were ruining her life and her career over nothing, how I was fine and this was all ridiculous. Mom didn't say a single word back, just kept recording and walking steady toward our car, keeping me slightly behind her. When we got in and locked the doors, Aunt Sharon stood outside my window for a minute before security came over and made her leave. Mom saved the video and sent it straight to Jackson. A few days later, Jackson called us into his office where a thick packet of papers sat on his desk from the hospital's legal team. They were offering us money to settle everything quietly with something called a non-disclosure agreement that meant we couldn't talk about what happened ever again. Mom and Jackson read through every page while I played with a stress ball, and I heard them whispering about clauses and terms. Something about staying quiet felt wrong in my stomach, like we'd be saying what happened didn't matter. Mom looked at me and asked what I thought, and even though money would help with my therapy and medical bills, I shook my head. The next day, Mom called the hospital lawyers back and told them no deal unless they changed their whole offer. She said she didn't want their money if it meant staying quiet because other kids with allergies deserved to be safe at that hospital. She demanded they create new policies about allergy protocols and train all their staff better, and if they wanted to settle, it had to include real changes, not just a check. Jackson helped her write up exactly what safety changes we wanted to see. That weekend, Mom took me to get a treat at a bakery downtown, but the second we walked in, I smelled peanut butter from the cookies in the case. My whole body went tight and I turned and ran outside before Mom could say anything, standing on the sidewalk shaking and trying to breathe. I hadn't even touched anything or eaten anything, but the smell made my brain think I was dying again. Mom came outside and hugged me while I cried, and I felt like such a failure. Like maybe Aunt Sharon was right, and I really was just being dramatic about everything. The next week at therapy, Camilla handed me a stress ball and sat across from me in her office with the fish tank bubbling in the corner. She explained that my brain was just trying to keep me safe after what happened, and that running from the bakery wasn't being weak or dramatic. We worked out this whole plan where I'd start by just looking at pictures of peanut butter jars, then maybe holding a sealed jar, then being in the same room with an open one. She wrote it all down on a chart with stickers I could add when I did each step. Meanwhile, Mom got a call from Nina Gorman saying they'd gotten Aunt Sharon's training records from the hospital through some legal thing called a subpoena. Turns out Aunt Sharon never finished this required training update about managing anaphylaxis that every pediatric nurse was supposed to complete 2 years ago. Nina said this was really important for the case because it showed Aunt Sharon didn't even have current training on allergic reactions when she destroyed my EpiPen. The CPS caseworker called Mom the same week with their final decision after all their interviews and investigation. They officially found that Aunt Sharon committed medical neglect by destroying my emergency medication and ignoring my allergic reaction. The caseworker explained they were creating this safety plan thing that meant if Aunt Sharon ever wanted to see me again, it would have to be supervised by another adult. I felt weird about it because part of me was glad they were protecting me, but another part was sad that my own aunt needed supervision to be around me. 2 weeks later, we had to go to the big nursing board hearing downtown in this government building that smelled like old carpet and coffee. The paramedics who saved me testified first and described exactly how bad I looked when they got to Sophie's house. One of them read from his report about my oxygen levels and how my throat was almost completely closed and how I was covered in hives that had merged into giant red patches. When it was my turn, I stood at the microphone with Mom holding my hand and read the statement Camilla helped me write. My voice shook and I had to stop twice to catch my breath, but I got through every single word about how scared I was and how Aunt Sharon wouldn't listen. Aunt Sharon's lawyer stood up next and tried to argue that she was using her professional judgment to treat what she believed were anxiety symptoms. The board members started asking her questions about why she destroyed medical equipment and why she didn't call 911 when I was clearly having a reaction. Aunt Sharon kept saying she thought I was being dramatic, but one board member pointed out that even if she thought it was anxiety, she still shouldn't have destroyed the EpiPen. After 3 hours of back and forth, the board said they needed more time to make their final decision, but they scheduled something called mediation for the civil claim part. Everyone looked exhausted walking out of that room, and I just wanted to go home and never think about any of this again. 3 days later during PE, we were eating lunch outside because it was nice weather, and this kid's granola bar accidentally touched my sandwich when he sat down. I remembered everything we'd practiced and immediately used my EpiPen right there on the grass while my teacher called 911. The other kids freaked out, but I stayed as calm as I could and told the teacher exactly what happened and what medicine I'd used. The ambulance came and took me to the hospital for observation, even though the EpiPen worked perfectly. The ER doctor checked me over and said I'd done everything exactly right and probably prevented a really bad reaction by acting so fast. Mom showed up within 20 minutes and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, but all I could think was how tired I was of being the kid who needed an ambulance at the school. A month later, we had the civil mediation at Jackson's law office with the hospital's lawyers and risk management people. After 6 hours of going back and forth, they finally agreed to pay for all my medical bills from the original incident, plus my ongoing therapy with Camilla. They also agreed to create new allergy protocols for the whole children's hospital system and do mandatory training for all staff about taking allergies seriously. The best part was they agreed to admit certain facts about what happened without making us sign anything that would keep us quiet about safety issues. 2 weeks after that, Nina called with the nursing board's final decision about Aunt Sharon's license. They suspended it for 2 years and said when she comes back she has to work under supervision for another year after that. It wasn't permanent like Mom wanted, but Nina said it was actually a really serious punishment that would stay on Aunt Sharon's record forever. Knowing she couldn't work with kids for at least 2 years, and that other hospitals would see this on her record, made me feel safer. The whole thing took almost 6 months from the party to the final decisions, and I was different by the end of it in ways I couldn't really explain. Grandma stopped calling after that, and when Mom tried to reach out for Thanksgiving, she just said she was busy and hung up. Sophie started seeing a counselor every Tuesday because she kept having nightmares about the party, and Aunt Sharon had to drive her there but wasn't allowed to go inside. I found this online group for kids with severe allergies through a link the hospital gave us, and the first time I logged on there were 40 other kids talking about carrying EpiPens and being scared of food. This girl from Texas posted about how her dad didn't believe in her tree nut allergy until she ended up in the ER, and everyone shared their own stories about family members who thought they were faking. They taught me tricks like taking photos of ingredient labels before eating anything new and keeping backup EpiPens in different bags so you never forget one. School got better once the 504 plan kicked in, because now I could take tests in the resource room where I had extra time and didn't feel rushed when my brain got stuck on questions. My math teacher started writing problems bigger on the board after Mr. Mullins explained about my processing stuff, and nobody made fun of me for needing to copy things down slower. The reading specialist met with me twice a week to work on comprehension strategies, since sometimes I'd read a whole page and not remember what it said. Camilla and I decided to switch to every other week appointments since I wasn't having panic attacks at lunch anymore and could use my coping skills when I felt scared about food. She gave me a worksheet to track my triggers and a whole plan for what to do if things got bad again, plus her emergency number that went straight to her cell phone. Mom spent a whole weekend writing this long letter to all our relatives explaining that I couldn't be around Aunt Sharon or Grandma without supervision because of what happened, and she made copies for everyone at Christmas. Uncle Mike called to say he understood and would make sure family gatherings were safe for me. But Cousin Janet just posted on Facebook about how families shouldn't let drama tear them apart. Aunt Lisa sent Mom angry texts about choosing sides and ruining the holidays. But Mom just blocked her number and said my safety mattered more than keeping everyone happy. Sophie's counselor suggested we try meeting at the park with both our moms there. So one Saturday, we sat on opposite ends of a picnic table while Sophie picked at the wood and told me she was sorry her mom hurt me. I told her it wasn't her fault and that I missed playing together, and she started crying and said she wished her mom would just say sorry for real. We agreed to try texting through our moms' phones and maybe hang out again someday when it felt less weird. But we both knew things would never go back to how they were before. The court made Aunt Sharon send this letter that listed all the facts about what she did, like destroying the EpiPen and refusing to call 911. But there was nothing in it about being sorry or understanding why it was wrong. Mom asked if I wanted to write back or have our lawyer respond, but I just put the letter in my memory box with all the other papers from everything and decided I'd already said what I needed to say at the hearing. A whole year passed and my life looked really different, but actually felt okay most days. I carried 3 EpiPens now, one in my backpack and one in my pocket, and one that stayed in the nurse's office, and I knew exactly how to use them without even thinking about it. The online support group became like my second family, where I could post about being scared to try new foods, and everyone understood without judging. At the school, I got mostly B's instead of A's, but my teacher said I was working hard, and that's what counted. Plus, I made 2 new friends in resource room who also had 504 plans. Mom and I had this whole routine for restaurants where we'd call ahead about ingredients and bring allergy cards to give the waiter, and I didn't feel embarrassed anymore about being the kid with special food needs. Sophie and I texted sometimes about regular stuff like TV shows and her new cat, carefully avoiding talking about our moms or anything medical. My processing delays meant homework took longer, and sometimes I'd forget words mid-sentence. But Camilla taught me strategies that actually helped, and I felt proud when I figured things out, even if it took extra time. The best part was knowing that everyone in my life now actually believed me about my allergies and would protect me instead of putting me in danger, which made me feel safer than I ever had before, even with everything that happened. That's today's story done. I'm grateful you listened all the way through. It makes telling them so worth it. Hit subscribe and let's share the next one too.